Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law News, produced by Anson Evaluate. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Wright, and we're just going to run through some news stories this week. So I'll pass over to Peter to introduce himself, and then we will get started.
Thanks, Amelia. My name is Peter. I'm a solicitor and a managing director at Digital Law, and we've got some I think really interesting stories to look at this week, including one of the largest GDPR fines to date, as well as one of the world's largest hotel chain having problems from a cybersecurity perspective. So for all those who've been away on holiday in the last few months, you know, this makes you think about, oh, I wonder what could have been accessed there.
Thanks, Peter. So we will start with the report from the ICO's website. So the ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office, and they have issued an enforcement notice to the Department of International Trade and a practice recommendation to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. This is for persistent failure to respond to information access requests within the statutory time limit. So I will pass over to Peter to explain what an FOI request is and why this is particularly important.
Thanks, Amelia. I mean, so this is very interesting that two major central government departments here are struggling to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests. Freedom of Information Act requests are where individuals can make requests for information. The key thing there is information. It's not the freedom of document request, so you don't get to just say, I'd like to see this report on XYZ. The idea is you want to see specific information about something that might be contained in a report or a series of reports. It could be a statistic, it could be a survey, who knows. The idea is that this legislation allows for the principle of transparency and open government, and was a major plank of the first Labour government under Tony Blair for 20 years, that came in the 1990s. So one of their big things was, let's open government up, let's make it open and transparent. I think the tsunami of FOI requests that the government now receives every year, not to mention the public sector, is an unintended consequence of those fairly bright and probably somewhat naive intentions. Indeed, in Tony Blair's autobiography, which I think is called A Journey, which was a big seller when it first came out, he said one of his biggest regrets was the Freedom of Information Act, because, of course, you're having to spend an awful lot of time, money and resources answering these requests rather than actually doing the delivery bit of government. And it's therefore often seen as a bit of an impediment to actually getting the job done, because you've got to have these big teams of people then who have to go through and answer all these requests in every single public body, every single government department, and it's a cost centre. And when resources are increasingly limited, taxpayers' money is having to go on that instead. Now, the point here is that the Department of International Trade and Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy departments are both struggling. DIT has issued late responses in over 50% of Freedom of Information Act requests. This is, of course, the Department of International Trade that is spending an awful lot of time trying to sign up new trade deals in the post-Brexit environment. So new trade deals have been signed with Australia and New Zealand and Japan, and therefore they then get hit by Freedom of Information Act requests where campaigners will say, can you please tell us what's in this section? Did you do an impact assessment on that section of a trade deal? Are you currently negotiating with this country? And of course, each single request that comes in, you have to reply, even if the reply is to say, we can't release that information and here's the reason why. So, and the other thing is that FOI requests are often now used as a significant tool by journalists in order to be able to get information they can then use to make a story from. So they're a major investigative tool as well. The Department of International Trade is being hit by what appears to be a sufficient number of these requests that mean that they can't turn around and answer them in the statutory time frame, which you should be responding to these things within a month, or if you can't do it that long, you then say, well, how long will it take, and agree a deadline with the person asking the question. Bayes has got a similar problem. They've had a 55% increase in requests since 2000. and they again seem to be struggling to be able to turn around the responses. So hence we've had an enforcement notice for the Department of International Trade, basically saying you need to improve the experience of the people who are asking the requests. And then we've got a practice recommendation against BEIS for persistent failures to respond to information requests within that statutory time frame, which shouldn't be a problem, but clearly it is becoming a significant problem for the department. What tends to happen here as well is that these enforcement notices, not sort of after just one or two instances, it will have been after multiple instances of failure that the regulators felt we can't afford to ignore this. We can't just brush it under the carpet and say it's de minimis. They're saying this is sufficiently happening all the time to suggest that there is a structural failure within these departments to turn around and meet their statutory obligations under this legislation.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story. So this is in relation to the Holiday Inn owner, Intercontinental Hotels Group. They have confirmed that the company has been hit by a cyber attack. So IHG, which is one of the world's largest hotel chains, issued a statement saying it was investigating unauthorized access to a number of its technology systems. I don't know about you, Peter, but unauthorized access does not sound good from the get-go. And so the UK-based company said its booking channels and other applications have been disrupted, and it has been working to fully restore the systems as soon as possible. So I will pass over to Peter to talk through this in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Amelia. So yes, IHG is the world's largest hotels operator. So they have franchises in most countries around the world, and they are responsible for those well-known brands like Holiday Inn and Crowne Plaza and Regent Hotels, Intercontinental Hotels. Funnily enough, there's usually one of those in most big capital cities. Kimpton, Stalybridge, all these sorts of resorts and hotels. So when they say we've had a problem and our systems have been compromised, and the wording here is booking channels and other applications, it's a cause for concern. Because, of course, they rely on not just people to carry out their bookings online, then an awful lot of the logistics surrounding the running of the hotels are also online. Now, they've said here that the company is in the process of notifying regulatory authorities, and that they did not say if there had been a loss of customer data, but you wouldn't really be notifying the regulators if there hadn't been personal data that was affected. So it just means they've said, we've had a problem, and then they'll actually reveal the full substance of that to the regulators, the applicable regulators that they are notifying. So the point here is that hotel chains have been on the end of big fines before. Let's not forget that Marriott Hotels was on the receiving end of a massive fine from the UK Information Commissioner for a wide-ranging data protection breach that ended up being reduced from sort of tens of millions of euro down to, I think it was either 15, 20 million euro after the pandemic, because of course hotels were heavily affected by the coronavirus lockdowns and pandemic restrictions around the world. So in this instance, we've got these issues that have affected IHG. We also know that within the last month, a Holiday Inn in Istanbul had its systems compromised by Lockbit, which released data that had been stolen from IHG. We don't know if this is linked. We don't know if it's the same incident that's now been reported, if that incident was part of a wider breach. I'm sure we'll find this out in due course. I think the key thing here as well is that with a big incident like this, there will have to be a significant investigation by the appropriate regulators. So they will take a look at this, and then they'll probably work out, well, have data subjects been affected? How has IHG supported them? What personal data was compromised? Was it payment information? Was it details of people's stays? Was it their home addresses? Was it the dates when they're away from their home addresses that could be used by people to compromise, and carry out theft, fraud, etc.? So it depends what sort of data has been compromised and the impact of that. So really, it's going to be the matter now of seeing those wheels turn, and then we'll find out exactly what the outcome of that is. I think one of the key things here is going to be that we're just coming to the end of the holiday season. So for the first time since the pandemic, we've had a lot of people going, almost back to the same volumes that we had pre-pandemic, using hotels, traveling around the world. So there is the potential there for a large volume of personal data to have been compromised compared to if this incident had happened, say, 12 months ago. So not great for the leisure industry, not great for IHG as a result.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story. And I mean, what would be a digital law news podcast without one of the big hitters? So Irish regulators have fined Instagram €405 million for violating children's privacy. So the long-running complaint concerned children's data and particularly looking at their phone numbers and email addresses. So some reportedly upgraded to business accounts to access analytic tools such as profile visits without realizing that this made more of their data public. Instagram's owner, Meta, said it planned to appeal against the decision. I mean, we can understand why here. And it is the third fine that's been handed to the company by the regulator. So this is actually looking at an old setting that has apparently been updated and have released kind of new features in order to keep teens safe. However, I will pass over to Peter to discuss this in more detail.
Thanks, Amelia. I think this is concerning when we think about the fact that we know that there are a lot of underage users on platforms like Instagram. So it's worrying then when we can see that their personal data can potentially be shared quite broadly and widely without the users quite understanding, A, that it's happening, and B, they don't necessarily understand the implications of that. So in this instance, they've been fined €4.5 million, which is £349 million, by the Irish Data Protection Commissioner. Why the Irish Commissioner? This is because Meta's servers and HQ for Europe is based in Ireland. So the often under-resourced Irish data protection regulator is the one that will have had to investigate here and has applied this fine. Facebook Meta have said that they are going to appeal this decision. They have said anyone under 18 ultimately has their account set to private when they join Instagram, so only people they know can see what they post, and adults can't message teens who don't follow them. They say that they've changed and improved their settings since this happened, saying, oh, we changed this over a year ago and introduced new features to keep people safe. Now, but the point here isn't to say, oh, it's wonderful now. The point is that at the time when they were carrying out the investigation, the system wasn't fit for purpose and was allowing this information to be breached. So that's why the regulator is hitting them, and it's hitting them hard. This is an interesting piece of enforcement when we think when GDPR was first introduced, a lot of people were skeptical, saying, oh, large fines could potentially be applied, 20% of 4% of global turnover, 20 million euros, whichever is greater, but this won't actually happen. It's all a threat. It's all a mirage. Well, a fine of £4.5 million is not to be sniffed at. And the point here, this is why it was made possible to apply these big fines, because even then, hundreds of millions of euro is not necessarily a huge amount to Instagram, to Meta. But I think it's more the bad publicity that a multi-hundreds of millions of euro fine then applies to Instagram, and it brings back into focus the constant story of the last few years, which is the poor settings on these platforms, Facebook, Meta, etc. That means that they are constantly having a running battle with regulators who are asking them to take care of user data in line with regulations like GDPR, and the struggles that these platforms are then having in demonstrating compliance with the requirements of the legislation. And this is the latest example of that. So Meta have said, we are going to appeal this. Let's see what happens. The Irish Data Protection Regulator will not have issued this fine without, I'm sure, raising the issue at the European Data Protection Board, speaking to other data protection regulators, almost sort of having that element of peer review to agree the action that is being taken before then issuing the enforcement notice. So now it remains to be seen, does the enforcement stand up to the scrutiny of an appeals process where Meta will throw huge resources And if you're being fined 400 million, you won't think twice about therefore spending a few million on trying to successfully appeal such a massive fine. So now it's a matter of, can the Irish data protection regulator actually withstand the pressure and scrutiny that Meta will bring to bear as it tries to successfully appeal this piece of enforcement?
Thanks, Peter. So no doubt we will be revisiting this story in the near future. So moving on to our final story today, and this is looking at kind of the gaining momentum app called Be Real. So if you're not aware of what Be Real is, it is essentially a social media platform which is used to take a picture within a 2-minute time frame of what you're currently doing. This is in order to kind of prevent retouching of photos, so you get kind of a realistic look at people's lives. So what happens is a notification will go out to everybody that has the app at the same time, and you'll have 2 minutes to essentially post whatever you are doing. And so why we are covering this is because if you are in the workplace and you take a picture of what you're working on, this can be a huge problem in relation to GDPR. So I will pass over to Peter to unpack why there's a lot of stop, no and don'ts in relation to this.
Indeed, thanks, Amelia. The danger of this practice really can't be overstated. When you end up taking photographs like this, this is saying, Be Real is saying, take a photograph of wherever you happen to be right now. So it could be in the workplace, could be at home, could be in someone else's home. Who knows what things could be betrayed. At the very least, if you're at home and you take a photograph, what could be in the background? It could be that a potential burglar could see where you hang your car keys in your home. It could show the locking system on your front door. It could show the window locks on your windows. If you're taking that photograph and uploading it to this platform, that photograph will contain the metadata that says exactly where your location is. So if you're taking an inadvertent photo that betrays security features, you're saying, here are the security features, here's a GPS tag, come and rob me. That's literally what you're doing. You could also then inadvertently say, share information about yourself that could be used so that someone could guess what your passwords are. If it shows information around your home, if it shows other family members, who knows what data could be compromised. If you're in the workplace, there's a reason why the majority of employers say don't take photographs and share them on social media of your workplace. Very often in the workplace, if you're in an office, there's going to be lots of information, names of customers, names of contacts, names of clients, files, business-related contact information, commercial information, confidential information could be strewn across the workplace. Might not be on your desk, it could be on the person's desk next to you, or on a set of shelves in the background. All it can take is someone to zoom in and be able to see potential confidential data, personal data. Who knows? If it shows you working away, it could show your email inbox, it could show the email addresses of the people that you're in contact with. Again, confidential data, commercial data, it could reveal passwords, it could reveal banking information, sort codes, account numbers. Just let your imagination run wild for a little bit. So there is an awful lot of information there that could be produced. If you're in someone else's home, could you end up then taking photographs of other people's children, other people's personal items, other people's personal effects, other people's security measures that they have in their home could end up being then, again, released far and wide using that GPS metadata that might be embedded in the photograph as well. So the problem here is that this is saying, share now where you are, trying to sort of bounce you into taking a photograph without thinking about these security issues, to make you just think, oh yes, I'll do that, take the photograph, share it, without stopping to think about the implications. Because if, for example, you were just going about your daily life, you might not think to share the piece of information or take a photograph in your home or in your workplace in that way. For various reasons, but then you're sort of being bounced into doing this because of the nature of the idea of sharing it for this purpose. which is therefore inherently dangerous. Sounds like a great idea, be real, etc., but in reality could be really rather damaging for you, loved ones, the people closest to you, not to mention your employer.
Thanks, Peter. So that was our last news story for today. A big thank you to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this webinar, and we will be back next week. Just a reminder that these episodes are available on our website, our YouTube channel and podcast channels as well, such as Spotify and Amazon and Apple Music. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.